Get You Some Radio.
When a reporter is going out to get a story, they're not trying to sell you anything. They're not trying to sell you advertising. They're not trying to sell you a product. They're there to get the story. And that's what makes it so appealing to people. People want to hear the story. So the minute you have an ulterior motive behind there, oh, I'm only having this conversation with you because I want to sell you something, you tarnish it. So to answer your question for a car salesman, I think the car salesman has to genuinely want to get people's story out. And if he can do that, if he or she can do that consistently, what will happen is people will tune into that content and they will learn to trust you. And then when they need to buy a car or someone says, I need to buy a car, do you recommend anyone? Go see my man, Terry Lancaster. He's awesome. He will, because I trust you. So you do have to be genuine in your motive, because people intuitively sense when you're not.
Now, your weekly dose of inspiration, perspiration, and just the right amount of bull defecation. The Get You Some Radio Show with your host, the Vice President of Making Shit Happen, Terry Lancaster.
Microphone check, 1 2 1 2. Welcome back to the Get You Some Radio Show. I am Terry Lancaster, same as it ever was, and welcome to another edition. These are the Get You Some studios, and today's guest on the show is my buddy Ryan Gerardi. So we're doing a kind of an about face. I've been on Ryan's shows a bunch of times, and Ryan has a bunch of shows. If you've been watching the Get You Some Radio Show, then we know I talk a lot about social selling and using social media and the tools and technologies that we have now to promote yourself as salespeople to get out there. Well, Ryan's been doing exactly that. He was country when country wasn't cool. He's been doing this a long, long time. One of the very first people I'd ever heard of that had created a blogcast or whatever. I don't even know what it was called back then in the dark ages of the internet, in the internet era. But he's been doing it, and we're going to talk with Ryan today about every individual salesperson, entrepreneur, business person, and brand becoming their own media company, setting yourself up just like a television station, just like an advertising network, just like ABC, NBC, CBS, becoming your own media company, delivering your message to your audience. We'll be back with Ryan right after this.
Make more friends. Sell more cars. 97% of car shoppers say they would prefer to know their salesperson before they ever set foot in the dealership. People buy from people they know, like, and trust, and they refer their family and friends to people they know, like, and trust. Visit terrylancaster.org to learn how your sales staff can get more reviews, more referrals, and more repeat business by building better, stronger, more authentic relationships online and in real life. terrylancaster.org.
Ryan Gerardi, what's going on, my brother?
Terry Lancaster, man. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, I appreciate you, and I appreciate everything you've been doing. So I don't normally do this, but you have been. I like to get into the meat of things before I get into the backstory. But your backstory is the story, because you've been doing this for a long time. When did you first start creating video blogs, and what did you call them? What was the deal with that?
Man, it's funny. It's hard to go back to where to start. My first video, film experience was a Super 8mm camera. That's how I first got into actually filming. It had no sound. This was late 90s. I bought it at some sort of antique show or, antique store. And I just started filming. And then from there, I got, when handy cams got modernized in the early 2000s.
Right.
I bought the best consumer grade handycam you could get. It was about $800. I was living in Portland, Oregon, working for HomeNet. We had just sold our product to Chrome. And so I bought this camera. And at that time, I would typically do what I'd call voyeuristic type video. I would film people from far away so they couldn't see because I wanted them in their natural element.
Right.
So that's how I got into making video. But I think to answer your question about video blogging, that would have to have started in late 2000s, like 2008, before webinars were really a thing, I would conduct these webinars for my blog at the time, which was Blog Pro Automotive, which I recently just sunset. And so I started doing one webinar like a month, and then I would do 2 a month, and then I did 3 a month. And next thing you know, I was doing a webinar twice a week. And that's how I grew my blog and my database, is I would invite people just like this, and they'd come on and they'd invite their friends to watch the webinar, and people would register. There's no such thing at the time as live streaming. And so that's how I built my, my initial network and base of subscribers was through webinar marketing.
For what purpose were you doing this? What was the intent? What was the end game?
So I think that's the best question to ask, is why are you doing what you're doing? And at the time, I just felt, I had been blogging at that time for a couple of years, and this is like 2007, 2008. Yeah, I'd just kind of been blogging for a little over a year or two. And I felt like, what am I going to do to get people engaged, to get people interested? And I just felt that video was the way to go. And so I started doing these webinars. So it really served a few purposes. It was a networking tool that allowed me to do exactly what you and I are doing here. It's building rapport, it's building relationships, it's knowledge transfer. And it had a marketing component in that it engaged people, it created subscriptions, website traffic, all that stuff.
Right. And so you were creating a blog before that, and it was called Blog Pro. What were you writing about?
At that time, Blog Pro Automotive was all automotive. In fact, I had launched it in the summer of 2006. And at the time, I was the COO for HomeNet. You probably remember HomeNet, an inventory company that got acquired by AutoTrader. And it was controversial to my staff, my management staff, because as COO of that company, I knew a lot of inside information. And blogging was such a new concept. So people looked at it as a kind of a violation of privacy. But, you know, I just wanted to have an outlet. I've always loved writing. I've always loved producing. And that just, once I realized that blogging was not a trend, that it was really kind of a permanent fixture to the digital experience, I launched the blog and I just started blogging. That's how I met a lot of people I know today, including Jeff Kirshner of Dealer Refresh. He was one of 3 or 4 people at the time that had blogs.
Yeah.
He was about a year into it as well. So it's great. It was just for networking.
And that's what I hear a lot, that I heard it specifically about podcasting, but about everything, that podcasting is the new networking, because every show that I do, every event that I'm on, every webinar, every webcast, every blog, every podcast, it really has 3 audiences, 3 constituencies, if you will. I'm there for myself. I want something to happen for me. I'm there for the audience. I want something good to happen for them, but I'm also there for the guest. I want something good to happen for the guest. So it's really a triad of, a triumvirate of people who are coming together, each of whom has their own kind of agenda, and they're trying to make something positive happen. And we talked about creating your own media company. Go into that concept, because you've actually created now a media company. You've gone from your Super 8 camera staring in the window like, an Alfred Hitchcock movie, and now you've actually had this media company where you're doing multiple shows a day, multiple streams a day, and you have a lot going on. You have created a media company. How did that come about, and how does that help the average salesperson on the street?
So the short answer is, I think just like technology should solve business problems, business should solve it needs to solve problems. So it's not like I sat down and said, hey, let's launch a media company. I'm using media to solve different problems. And one of those problems is scalability. Now, how do you manage, hundreds, let alone thousands of relationships? So if you look at pop culture, I think, and the entertainment business, right? They'll pour millions upon millions of dollars into producing a movie, hundreds of thousands of dollars into producing music. You make that investment of time and money. so that it can be consumed and enjoyed by thousands, if not millions of people over time. It's a good investment and it's scalable. It's not easy to create that type of content. So with business, if you think of the math, and if you look at it from a salesperson standpoint, a really effective salesperson, let's just say an inside salesperson, or if you're a business owner and you need to sell your product, for your business, if all you did was call people, let's actually back up. If all you did was walk the streets and knock on doors, how many businesses, how many people can you approach in a given period? And let's just say a 5-hour or an 8-hour day, whatever you want that to be, there's a finite number of people that you can reach physically. The phone is that next level of scalability. So I think a good phone person should be able to manage 300 to 500 relationships or contacts really in a 30-day period. But that has a limit. There's only so many people you can call and talk to. That's why email became what it is, because you could reach so many people so in much scalable fashion. But email, as we know, is not a marketing tool anymore. It's not an effective means for maybe connecting and engaging. It's more of a branding tool, if anything. So I think that's where media, live streaming, video, podcasting comes into play. It allows you to have a personable experience that's voice and face. It's the next best thing, the closest equivalent to breaking bread and shaking hands with somebody.
Yeah, that's what I would say. It's if I'm on video, and that's why I love video. Video is eyeball to eyeball, belly to belly, toe to toe. It's, you're looking there. You can see the inflections in people's faces. You can see if they're smiling. You can see if they're making eye contact. You can see if they're wandering around nervous, tugging at their tie. There's lots of cues that you get that you're never going to pick up in an email or even a phone call, for that matter. So there's a greater degree of personality that you can place into it, and so humanity, for lack of a better term. But the problem then is with each step of technology, when you go from knocking on the door to making the phone call, to making the emails, to doing a podcast, to doing videos, to producing Late Night with David Letterman, with every step of the way, as you're increasing the technology, there's a tendency to remove some of the humanity out of it. And people are so interested, especially with email and marketing. Marketing automation has gotten to be such a trend, and people go all out to automate everything, but every step that they're automating is removing some of the humanity. So how do you use this technology? How do you produce this? How do you brand yourself and create this media company and maintain personal connections one-to-one?
The personal connections to me are one-to-one. You and I have been collaborating now for a year, and you can tell I'm very one-on-one collaborative. And when you lock in with a person who mutually collaborates with you, I think that's where you need to focus. And it's a great problem to have when you can't actually keep up with everybody that you want to collaborate with. So what happens is, there might be people I want to be collaborating with, but they're not necessarily responding to my frequency. And so you have to do your due diligence to make sure they know that you're trying to collaborate with them, but there's only so much you can do. Mm-hmm. At some point, you have to focus on the people that are responding to you. And it goes back to that scalability. To me, when you bring up automation and scalability, the goal of that, the goal of automation, the goal of scalability isn't to eliminate the human aspect of it. It's a filter and a proxy in a lot of ways, but ultimately business progress, it all comes down to the relationships that you're forming and who you're collaborating with. And when you get people to collaborate like yourself, I mean, what you've done, with me over the past year, you can't ask more of that from anyone. So I'll take this time to say, hey, thanks for all that you've done for me this past year.
Well, it's reciprocal, and and so I've tried to explain this. I work a lot, as you know, with automotive salespeople, and that's kind of my thing. Is I'm encouraging automotive salespeople to become media companies, to create their networks and to create their audience through the use of the technology. And I've had this conversation. So I'm talking to a salesperson, and I'm trying to get him just go out and interview some local business people. And there's a funny switch, because salespeople are taught to sell. We're closers, baby. We're 10 times this. We're all in. We're charge. We're trial balloon. What can I do to get you in this car today? And we want to sell. And a lot of what you're talking about, and a lot of what we're doing, isn't immediately a sale. It's going to lead to money down the line. But the first thing it's going to do is build a relationship. So I'll tell them, go out and interview the person from the local coffee shop. Go next door and talk to the person at the local coffee shop. Put them on camera with you, and y'all talk about anything. Talk about the local community, but just get out there and get them on camera and kind of raise them up and make them the star. And they want to know, well, how does that help me sell cars?
Right.
So how does that help them sell cars?
I can't speak to how it helps you sell cars from a personal experience, but I can in theory. Because if you think of a media company going out and doing journalism, and I know you have a journalistic background, that's what you got your degree in. When a reporter is going out to get a story, they're not trying to sell you anything. They're not trying to sell you advertising. They're not trying to sell you a product. They're there to get the story. And that's what makes it so appealing to people. People want to hear the story. So the minute you have an ulterior motive behind there, oh, I'm only having this conversation with you because I want to sell you something, you tarnish it. So to answer your question for a car salesman, I think that car salesman has to genuinely want to get people's story out. And if he can do that, if he or she can do that consistently, what will happen is people will tune into that content and they will learn to trust you. And then when they need to buy a car, or someone says, I need to buy a car, do you recommend anyone? Go see my man, Terry Lancaster. He's awesome. He will, because I trust you. So you do have to be genuine in your motive, because people intuitively sense when you're not.
Yeah. I want to backtrack a second before I forget, because you talked about when you were with HomeNet and you were COO, and they were wary of what you were doing, and they really didn't want you. They were uncomfortable with this idea of you presenting yourself and of possibly leaking out their great secrets. And that was 10, 12 years ago, and it's still an ongoing problem. There are car dealerships who don't want their salespeople doing this. It's a huge problem in the financial industry. Financials, they're such regulation driven that I know financial people who want to do a podcast, who want to do a blog, who want to create videos, and they just literally can't, because their company won't let them. Even if they, I tell them, everyone loves cookies. Do a podcast about cookies. It's not, you don't necessarily have to give financial information. You need to create an audience and create relationships. But even still, a lot of the powers that be are just so uncomfortable with this whole idea. Why is it so hard for some people to get their minds wrapped around this? Well,
the short answer for that is just it's a misunderstanding or a lack of understanding, or it's an ignorance, if you will, of what is what. It's a tough spot to be in when you are beholden to an employer. It's one of the things that I think probably may or may not propel you, but it certainly motivates me to be self-employed, is because I'm not beholden to an employer. I hate the idea that I can't do something for myself if it's beneficial to me and my profession. There are sensitivities. People can, be in sensitive positions. If you work for the CIA, you're in a sensitive position, and that's just a very extreme example. But I would argue there's always something you can do in media, in creativity, that does not jeopardize or threaten your position. But if you apply, I work for a car dealership, I'm a salesperson, and I want to use media to gain exposure and build customers. If your employer is like, absolutely not, you can't do this, to me, that's a warning sign that you need to go find a place that'll support what you need to do.
Yeah.
Because that business that you're with is already way behind the times.
Yeah, but like I said, unfortunately, there are entire industries that are behind the times and really show no signs of changing. So if you were a salesperson, or an entrepreneur, so you had complete freedom, and this you and I talk about this some other time, but I think a true entrepreneur is what I consider a true entrepreneur. Doesn't have any choice about being an entrepreneur. We are where we are because there's absolutely no way we can get up and go ask some boss for permission to do something. It's not in our genes to do that. And but if you are one of these people who you have an understanding boss, or you have complete freedom to do some of this stuff, where would you get started? You started with blogging, and you went into to vlogging, and now you're doing you're doing live streams, and you're doing podcasts, and you're doing videos. There's so much, and we have so many opportunities, and there's so many vehicles to take. Where do we get started? If we want to create, Terry, well, I actually have terrylancaster.tv, but if we want to create our own media presence, where do we start? What's the first thing that we do?
So there's definitely no right or wrong answer, I think, to that question. You have to start somewhere, right? The greatest journey starts with the first step. You have to start somewhere. You can't accomplish everything and be everywhere immediately. You have to have building blocks. So you do have to start somewhere. To give you an example, again, going back to my first videos, when I look at getting into digital video and I look at the quality, I mean, it's horrendous, Terry. You can hardly watch these, the pixelization and everything. My first podcast, which I launched in 2007, 2008, maybe 2007, I got 6 episodes in, and it was taking up time. The quality wasn't there. I had no clue what I was doing. And so I abandoned that, but at least I had tried, and I wish I had stuck with it. So I think you just have to pick something that makes sense for you, that you follow people, watch people, study people. I don't know about you, but I study. I study people. I enjoy what they do, their presentation, their content. I even study people that I'm not a big fan of. It's always good to see, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that guy.
All right.
So I think you have to study a lot, and then you have to try something out and give it a shot, and just definitely start somewhere, but you got to define that on your own.
You talked about the quality, and this is kind of a thing that people get hung up on it. And let me tell you my background. You mentioned I have a journalism degree. I have a journalism degree. I come from a radio background. I've owned an advertising agency for 30 years. I've produced thousands of television commercials and thousands of radio commercials, and I always wanted them to sound a certain way, to look a certain way. I wanted things that popped. I wanted big, bright colors. I wanted them to be perfect. But I've come to the conclusion personally, and that what we're doing as an individual promoting ourselves, that perfection is really not the quality to strive for. In my opinion, I think humanity, authenticity is more important than perfection, and people are willing to look past a few glitches in the audio, or if the lighting is less than perfect, or if I've got bags under my eyes, or whatever whatever the flaw is. People not only look past those flaws, but they kind of embrace those flaws. And if things are too slick, that it doesn't get the attention now, especially on social media, people will look past it and go, "Oh, that's just some marketing message." And my friend Mark Schaefer calls it the death of advertising. If it looks like it's advertising, if it's slick and perfect and perfectly crafted, then people tend to ignore it. What do you think about that?
Well, I'll disagree that you shouldn't strive for perfection. I think you should strive for it, but you shouldn't not release something just because it's not perfect, because you can't achieve perfection. You can constantly edit a book and make it better. Everything can be improved. So when you think and act like a media publisher, right, you do want to aim for a high standard, and you do want to aim for those details. But there's a time and an expense to everything that you do. And ultimately you have to justify that time and the expense. There has to be an ROI on that, because you don't get that time back. So you have to pick and choose your battles of what I release stuff all the time where I'm like, I would love to spend more time on this, but I got to move on and let things out. I hear imperfections. There's nothing more imperfect than creativity.
Mm-hmm.
when you're in the creative process, you feel how imperfect that it is. But from the outside looking in, the people that were not part of the creative process, they won't necessarily notice the imperfection if you're focused on the details and taking it seriously.
You mentioned ROI, and this is a conversation you and I have had multiple times, that you create a lot of content and you're super focused on creating content, but actually you would like to be selling more, to be engaging more, to be one-to-oneing and developing business relationships. But you're so focused now on creating the content, and you've got so many commitments that you're involved in creating the content that you don't have time to do some of the sales calls that you like cold calling and doing that. And so how do you juggle what we're doing, and how do you make time to make ROI?
Such an important question. When it comes to sales, I'm reading a book by Ian Coburn, who was a guest on my show recently. And I love the term flip the script, because part of my message has been that everything is marketing. So human resources is marketing, customer service is marketing, sales is marketing. A lot of people, there's a stigma around the word sales.
Right.
Advertising is a form of marketing. Campaigning is a form of advertising and marketing. What he defines is that sales is a function of customer service, and you should be providing service. That's what sales is, with a very intentional purpose of a transaction where the money is flowing in your direction. So if you look at sales as I'm trying to sell you something, okay, I'm trying to give you a product or service in exchange for money, that's a transactional process that takes time, it takes talent, it takes skill, it takes practice, and it's not for everybody. But what if you think of strategic alliances that naturally drive revenue on their own? Let the alliance drive revenue for itself. Now you can focus on what you really need to and want to do. So for me, I'm focused more on strategic alliances that have a definitive monetization point in them, so that I can focus on what I do. It doesn't eliminate the process of business development. It doesn't eliminate the art of deal making and signing contracts, but it's putting a structure in place that has a monetization built into it, so that the money is being made without every individual transaction involving me personally.
Yeah.
Hopefully that gives you kind of a picture. But again, a car salesman, using that analogy, is thinking, I need to produce videos and content and be a media company so that I can sell you a car. And that's really granular. I think a car salesman needs to think of it more as, I need to put a network in place, an alliance, if you will, that makes me hunted. You have to be hunted, because if you're always hunting, it's exhausting. It's just as exhausting setting yourself up to be hunted, and you can't ever really stop. You know that as well as I do. If I stop producing content, then no one's going to sit back. I mean, very few people will sit back and go, oh, where did Ryan go? I mean, think of the most famous people in the world, the artists that you haven't thought of for 20 years. You don't stop because they stopped making music. Yeah. You move on because you have yourself to take care of. So I think going back to the whole media, think and act like a media publisher, is put the structure in place that allows money to flow in your direction. You're building the system, you're building the network, and content is the fuel and the process to make all that possible.
All right, so this is the point in the show. Everyone knows where we are now. The Sum and the Get You Some radio show is health, happiness, and prosperity. And I promise everyone who watches the show or listens on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever they might listen to it, or goes to my website, that if they'll spend 30 minutes with me, running my mouth and chatting with my guest, and having interesting conversations, because I started this really for 100%. Selfish reasons. I wanted to have interesting conversations with interesting people. And if they'll listen to me do that they'll walk away with one thing that they can do in their life today, right now, as soon as they put down their phone, to create health, happiness, and prosperity in their life, in their career, with their relationships. One thing that will make their lives better. So I ask every guest this one question. Ryan, what's something they can do today to make their lives better?
I love that question. I love hearing the different answers. And before I respond, let me just say, hey, it's cool to be here, and I thank you for having me, because I'm always the host and the one asking the questions. And this is a newer experience for me, and I appreciate the opportunity. I think it would be cliche to say just do it, because I think we hear that a lot. Just do a video, just do a podcast. I think that would be cliche. And in my wheelhouse, and with a lot of my content, something that comes up a lot is know your why. Define and understand your why. And I think that ties into having a vision, a long-term vision for what you're doing and why you're doing it. You need to know how it fits in with your long-term plan. If you don't have that vision, and it's not like, what's the Peanut saying? Life's what happens while you're busy making plans.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You still need to have a plan. My vision for my business today is different from a year ago. And the vision today from 2 years ago is stark contrast. So you have to always be thinking ahead of what that plan is. And write it down, whatever it takes to have that vision, and just imagine it and write it down and talk about it and share it with people. Don't just have it in your mind. You need to get it out, because when you listen to your ideas, when you talk about them with people, it'll sharpen that picture in your mind. And as long as you have that vision and you know how what you're doing fits in, then you can handle everything that comes to you. If you're in a day job working for an employer and you want to have a podcast, you need to define how that podcast is going to feed your long-term vision, and how it doesn't contradict with your day job, and how it's everything is a stepping stone to where you're going. Remember Steve Jobs in his infamous speech at Stanford's graduation. He says, when you're moving forward, you don't always see how everything's connected. Until you turn around and look behind you, you see how it all connects, right?
You can only connect the dots in reverse.
Connect the dots. They will connect. I trace everything I'm doing literally back to 8th grade, when I was dubbing mixed cassette tapes, and I hand draw the logo. I had a logo design, and I put the song tracks and all that, and I would give them as gifts to people. I would custom make mixed cassette tapes for people, mostly girls, because they loved it, and give them
mostly girls
love songs they liked. And it was just, I was giving something to people. I wasn't out selling it. That wasn't my point. But that's a dot for me. That was the very beginning for me of multimedia production.
Yeah, the story is for me, and you know this, I had a journalism degree, and I thought the journalism degree was useless, and I was late to the train, but about 7 or 8 years ago, I realized that storytelling and the ability to tell my story and other people's stories in today's connected economy may be the most valuable skill in the world.
I'm with you. I've contemplated going back to school for journalism. I don't have, professional training or education around journalism, but the way things have evolved for me over the past year, I think and act like a journalist and a media outlet, a media company.
If someone wanted to get in touch with the Ryan Gerardi Media Corporation, how do they go about doing that?
Well, I think the most fun way is to just search my first and last name on your preferred search engine. I use DuckDuckGo, but you could Google me as well, and you'll get a lot of information, and you can pick how you want to. But I'm a big user of LinkedIn, and so that's a great place to connect with me personally.
But DuckDuckGo is your business card.
Well, people say Google. I've actually made a point to utilize Google search less.
Yeah.
Because when it comes down to it, Google is an advertising platform. It just is.
Yeah.
And so DuckDuckGo is an alternative, and it has been sufficient. I have no complaints. I enjoy using it, and it's not designed to be an advertising platform right now.
Ryan, thank you so much for being on the show with us today. Appreciate you. Appreciate everyone watching. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Terry.
Get You Some Radio. You've been listening to the Get You Some Radio Show. Subscribe today at terrylancaster.tv to hear more episodes, win valuable cash and prizes, and get free training to help you create an army of buyers who know, like, and trust you before they've ever even met you. It's a big, wide world, boys and girls. Get out there and get you some.